What if the whole town decided your fate in one scorching afternoon, and the only man willing to save you was a stranger with storm-gray eyes? The sun hung like a burning brass button over Dust Haven, New Mexico territory, baking the streets until the dirt cracked like old leather. Sarah McKenna stood in the shadow of Hartley's general store, sweat prickling her back, her work-worn hands gripping young Thomas's shoulders. She tried to keep her breath steady as Sheriff Wade Hollis unrolled a document that felt heavier than any rope. By order of the territorial court, Hollis called out, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd like a death bell. One Sarah McKenna, widow of Michael McKenna, having defaulted on debts totaling $300 to Mr. Silas Crowley's Frontier Lending Company, is hereby ordered to settle said debt through labor contract or forfeit all property rights. The words struck Sarah like hammer blows. $300. The loan had been for $50. Seed money to keep the farm alive after Michael died in the mine collapse. She had paid $70. She had receipts. She had proof. Or she had, until those receipts vanished from her strongbox a week ago. Missing the same morning, she'd found Sheriff Hollis's boot prints outside her window. "This is theft," Sarah said, voice calm though her chest trembled. "Plain and simple theft." Crowley stepped forward, tall in his polished black suit, every inch of him oiled in money and power. His smile was thin and cold. "The law is the law, Mrs. McKenna. You signed the papers." He tipped his hat in mock courtesy. "But I'm willing to be generous. 5 years' labor in my copper mine will settle your debt." "5 years?" Thomas burst out, his 14-year-old voice breaking. "That's slavery!" "Thomas," Sarah warned quietly, squeezing his shoulder, but truth burned in the boy's words. Everyone knew the Frontier Contract Labor Act was a legal cage, a way for men like Crowley to own people without saying the word. Crowley wasn't finished. "There is another option," he said, eyes raking slowly over Sarah's figure with a hunger that made her skin crawl. "A public auction for your labor contract. Perhaps the good people of Dust Haven would prefer to employ you." The crowd shifted. Some looked away in shame. Others leaned forward with open interest. Every woman in town knew what employment from men like Morrison or Crowley meant. Sarah lifted her chin. "When?" "Right now," Crowley said, gesturing to the old platform near the trough. "Strike while the iron's hot." Thomas grabbed her arm. "We can run. We can go to California. I'll work. We'll survive." She touched his cheek. "With what money, Tom? On foot? We don't run. We stand." They walked toward the platform, the same one used for cattle sales last spring. Today, she was the livestock. Sheriff Hollis stepped onto the platform, the sun glinting off his tarnished badge. "Bidding starts at $300, he announced. Sarah climbed the steps, each one scraping against her pride. She stood straight, refusing to bow her head before these men. "300, Crowley called immediately. "And I'll generously allow her boy to visit once a month." Quote, "310, came a voice from the back. "Dale Morrison, owner of the roughest boarding house in Dust Haven. Women there didn't cook or clean. They served whiskey and suffered hands they didn't want." 320, Crowley replied smoothly. The numbers climbed. Sweat slipped down Sarah's spine as sun hammered her. She saw Thomas's pale face in the crowd. He tried to push forward, but men held him back. 400, Morrison barked. Crowley narrowed his eyes. 410. 450. The murmurs grew. At that price, Morrison would expect every penny earned back in the worst ways. Sarah's fists tightened. "Going once," Hollis began. "Going twice." 500. The voice cut cleaner than a knife. Deep, steady. A sound that made every head turn. A man pushed through the crowd. Tall, lean, coat dusty from the trail, stubble shadowing a strong jaw. His eyes, gray like winter storms, locked on Hollis, not Sarah, not the crowd. Calm, unmoving. 500, he repeated. Crowley frowned. "Sir, this is a local matter." The stranger stepped onto the platform, spurs ringing. Territorial auctions are open to any man with cash. He tossed a leather pouch to Hollis. The coins clinked heavy and sure. Hollis's eyes widened. It's all here, 500 in gold. 5, 10, Crowley snarled. 600, the stranger said without blinking. 700. 1,000. His voice didn't rise, didn't shake. Final offer. Unless you want to explain to these folks why you're paying triple a debt for one woman. The crowd fell silent. Crowley went red, then pale. He couldn't risk questions. Couldn't risk anyone wondering why he wanted her so badly. Going once, Hollis whispered. Twice? Sold to Mr. Jack Garrison. Sarah swayed. Sold. Sold like cattle. Sold to a stranger. Her humiliation burned hotter than the sun. But when she met his eyes, she saw something unexpected. Weariness. And beneath it, a cold anger aimed not at her, but at Crowley. Jack stepped closer, voice low enough, only she heard. I need you to trust me for 5 minutes. Can you do that? She didn't trust men, not anymore. But something in his tone, in his stance between her and the leering crowd, made her nod. He turned to Hollis. The papers, all of them. Hollis scrambled to fetch the documents. Garrison read each page carefully before signing. Then, surprising everyone, he handed the contract straight to Sarah. Hold on to this, he said. It's important. Thomas rushed forward. You can't take her. She's not. Jack lifted a hand. Easy, son, we're not done yet. He nodded to Sarah. Follow me, we need to talk. In private. She followed him behind the store. Not because he owned her, not because she trusted him, but because he felt like the only person in Dusthaven not trying to break her. Now it begins, she thought. Her life had been sold. But maybe her fight had just started. What if the man who bought your freedom wasn't claiming ownership at all, but offering you a chance to strike back at the one man no one else dared challenge? Behind the general store, sheltered from curious eyes, Jack Garrison leaned against the wall like a man carrying a lifetime of ghosts. Sarah stood across from him, dust still clinging to her dress, the auction papers shaking slightly in her hands. First things first, Jack said, his voice steady but low. I'm not in the business of owning people. That contract says your labor belongs to me, but as far as I'm concerned, it's just paper. Then why buy it? Sarah asked. Why throw $1,000 at a stranger? Because Crowley wouldn't have stopped, Jack said simply. Not today, not next week. You were his prey. I've seen his type. They don't let go. She studied him, the worn trail coat, the scuffed boots, the calloused hands. He wasn't rich, he wasn't polished, but he stood like a man carved into the land itself, unmovable. What now? She asked. Jack took off his hat, running a hand through dark hair touched with silver. Now we figure out how to turn this whole mess back on Crowley. That contract gives us legal standing to challenge the way it was created, but I'll need your help. And somewhere for me and Thomas to stay, Sarah said quietly. Jack nodded. I've got an old way station at the edge of town. Roof holds, stove works, 2 bedrooms, safe enough. Thomas bristled. Why help us? You don't know us. Jack's gray eyes darkened. Maybe because a man like Crowley took something from me once. Maybe because I've seen what happens when folks like him go unchecked. Maybe because somebody has to stand up. He pushed off the wall. Come on. Let's get you out of sight. They walked through the thinning crowd, whispers trailing behind them like dust. People stared at Sarah the way they always had. Some curious, some pitying, some hungry. But for the first time, none dared approach. Jack walked too close, too quiet, too watchful, and Crowley was nowhere to be seen. At the way station, Jack lit a lamp, casting warm light over the dusty room. A small kitchen, a scarred table, 2 doors leading to narrow bedrooms. Thomas checked the water barrel. Sarah tested the stove with practiced hands. It'll do, she said softly. It's yours for now, Jack said. But understand something. Crowley won't back off. He'll come harder. Quote, "We know," Sarah said. Jack pulled a notebook from his coat and set it on the table. "I've been tracking him for 6 months." Sarah stared. "Tracking him?" Jack opened the book. Names filled the pages, dates, notes, crossouts. Margins filled with tight handwriting. Maria Santos, cantina foreclosed. Austin Brothers farm seized. Washington family, jailed, land taken. McKenna, receipts missing. "You're not the first," Jack said, "but with your help, you might be the last." Sarah sank into a chair. "So this is bigger than us." "Much bigger." Thomas returned from fetching water, cheeks red with anger. "What's your stake in this?" Quote. Jack hesitated. For the first time, Sarah saw something raw in him. Not anger, not calculation, pain. "You ever hear of the Garrison ranch up in Colorado?" he asked quietly. Sarah blinked. "Burned down a few years back. People said range war." Jack shook his head. "Crowley wanted our water rights. When my father wouldn't sell, Crowley forged papers showing unpaid taxes. Sheriff evicted us. Night before the hearing, the barn burned. Fire spread to the house." He swallowed hard. "My mother and sister didn't make it out." Silence filled the room, heavy, grieving. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. Jack closed the notebook. "I've spent 3 years gathering evidence. Crowley's the spider in a web that stretches from here to Denver, and today I finally saw a chance to crack it." Sarah drew a breath. "What do you need from us?" "Everything," Jack said. "Every paper, every memory, names of anyone else cheated." "And Thomas?" she asked sharply. "He stays safe." Jack nodded. "Always." They worked by lamplight, sorting what papers Sarah had left. Jack asked questions. Sarah answered. Thomas added details she'd forgotten. Slowly, a picture formed, one of deceit, forged numbers, and quiet threats. Hours later, a thud hit the front door. Jack's hand went to his Colt. "Stay back." He opened the door. A rock lay on the step, wrapped in twine around a piece of paper. Jack unrolled it. Sarah read the crude message over his shoulder. "Garrison, you bought a devil, and you'll burn with her." The note burst into flame as Sarah tossed it into the stove. Thomas rushed in, breathless. "Someone's watching from across the street. Big man. Looks like one of Crowley's ranch hands." "Let him watch," Sarah said, shoulders stiffening. "We're not running." Jack stared at her, really looked at her. Firelight caught the strength in her jaw, the resolve in her dark eyes. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "Good," she answered. "I've had enough of being what men expect." They cleaned, ate, prepared for morning. Jack checked windows. Thomas polished rifles. Sarah organized the few receipts she still had. Night settled over the way station. A long, dangerous night. "Get some sleep," Jack said. "Tomorrow we start the fight." Sarah paused at her door. "Jack, whatever happens, thank you for saving us." He looked away, troubled. "Don't thank me yet. We have a long way to go." Quote. Later, as the lamp died down and the desert wind rattled the boards, Jack sat in the shadows with a Winchester across his knees, keeping watch. Sarah lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to the quiet footsteps of a man who'd stepped between her and a monster. For the first time in months, she felt hope. A small spark, but in the Wild West, even a spark could start a wildfire. What if the moment you finally stood your ground was the same moment the entire town rose with you? Before dawn, the desert sky still dark and cold, Jack saddled the horses behind the way station. Sarah stepped outside, pulling her shawl tight against the morning chill. Thomas carried a satchel stuffed with documents, the proof Crowley never expected anyone to gather. Today, they would face the judge in town. Today, Crowley would try to crush them, and today they would fight back. Jack glanced at Sarah. "Ready?" She nodded. "Ready." They rode toward Dust Haven through quiet streets. Lamps glowed in windows. A few early workers lifted their heads as the three passed. They knew something was coming. Everyone did. Crowley had been stirring fear all night. Sheriff Hollis stood on the courthouse steps, arms crossed, his hat pulled low to hide the bandage Sarah had given him with her pottery swing. "You'll want to turn around," Hollis called out. "Judge Blackwood arrived last night. Contracts being reviewed. Crowley aims to wipe the slate clean." Jack dismounted. "We're here to present evidence." "Evidence?" Hollis snorted. "Boy, Crowley owns every judge from here to Santa Fe. You think anyone will listen to you?" "We'll find out," Sarah said, stepping past him. Inside the courthouse, Judge Blackwood sat behind the desk, thin, sharp-nosed, a man who looked like he'd rather smell perfume and coin than justice. Crowley stood beside him, polished and smug. "Mrs. McKenna," Crowley said. "Sheriff Garrison." "What a delightful inconvenience. I hear you've stirred trouble." Sarah held her ground. "We brought proof of your fraud." Crowley laughed. "Fraud? My dear, you owe a debt. You signed willingly. This man," he nodded toward Jack, "bought that debt. Nothing more." Quote. Blackwood slammed his palm on the desk. "This matter is settled. The contract stands void. Mrs. McKenna returns to auction at once." Thomas lunged forward. "You can't! You're lying!" "Boy," Blackwood snapped. "Silence!" Jack stepped closer. "Judge, we have documents, witnesses." The judge waved him off. "I don't need your papers. I've been assured everything is in order." Crowley smirked. Sarah's heart sank, but Jack's expression didn't change. He simply said, "Then we'll take this higher." Blackwood scoffed. "Higher? There is no higher here." Jack leaned in, gray eyes steady. "There is, if a federal marshal gets involved. And we've already sent word north." For the first time, Crowley's smile faltered. Before Blackwood could respond, a pounding shook the door. Abel Cortez burst in, face pale. "Garrison! Crowley's men! They're riding through town!" "Armed." Crowley's eyes gleamed. "Seems your time is up, Mrs. McKenna." Jack moved fast. "Sarah! Thomas! Back door!" Gunshots cracked outside. The courthouse exploded into chaos. Jack shoved Crowley into a wall long enough to grab the contract papers, then sprinted for the exit. Outside, dust filled the air. Horses thundered down Main Street. Men with rifles shouted threats. The scent of danger thickened. "Crowley wants Sarah alive!" someone yelled. "And the boy!" Jack's gut twisted. "Stay close!" They ducked behind water barrels as bullets split wood around them. Sarah aimed the Winchester, steady hands despite the fear roaring in her chest. "Two coming left!" Thomas shouted. Sarah fired. One rider toppled. The other veered away. Jack grabbed her arm. "We can't hold them off forever. We need backup." As if the desert heard him, a horn rang out, sharp and high. Riders appeared over the ridge, not Crowley's men, townsfolk. Jim Torres with his hammer raised like a weapon. The Washington family armed with old Civil War rifles. Mrs. Patterson swinging her shotgun like she meant business. The Hendricks boys firing into the air, yelling like banshees. Dusthaven had risen. Crowley's men hesitated. Ordinary folks, armed and angry, were a different kind of threat. Abel galloped up. "Jack, we're with you, all of us!" Sarah felt something swell in her chest, something fierce and bright. She wasn't alone anymore. These people, her people, were fighting with her. Jack's eyes met hers. "Let's end this." They charged. The fight spread across the street. Horse hooves pounding, guns firing, shouts echoing. Jack moved like a man forged for war, protecting Sarah at every turn. Thomas stayed low, passing ammunition, yelling warnings when someone aimed too close. Crowley himself rode forward, face twisted with rage. "Mrs. McKenna!" he roared. "I will see you broken." Sarah stepped out from behind a barrel, rifle raised. "You don't own me, Silas Crowley. Not now. Not ever." He lifted his gun. Jack fired first. Crowley's weapon spun from his hand. The man toppled from his horse, clutching his bleeding wrist. "Stay down," Jack growled. Before anyone could move, thunder cracked the sky. A boom, a whistle, a badge flashed in the sunlight. Federal Marshal Reeves and his men galloped into town at full speed, dust boiling behind them. "Marshal service!" Reeves shouted. "Drop your weapons!" Crowley's remaining men froze. Some bolted, others threw down their guns. Reeves dismounted, walked straight to Crowley, and kicked his weapon away. "Silas Crowley, you're under federal arrest for fraud, coercion, and conspiracy." Crowley sputtered, "You can't." Reeves held up a telegram. "Judge Nathan Hart sent this personally. You're done." A cheer rose through Dusthaven, not small, not polite, a roar. Sarah felt Thomas crash into her arms, sobbing in relief. Her whole body shook as Jack stepped close, his hand warm against her back. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Jack said. "We did." Reeves clapped him on the shoulder. "Garrison, Hart wants your testimony in Santa Fe, and Dusthaven needs a real sheriff." Thomas wiped his face. "Jack already is one." Sarah breathed in the truth of it. Jack wasn't her owner. He had never been. He was her partner, her protector, her future. Jack met her eyes, voice low. "It's over now." Sarah touched his chest. "It's just beginning." As Crowley was dragged away in chains, Dusthaven gathered around the three of them, a circle of people who had found their courage, their justice, their unity. The dust settled, the danger passed, and in the middle of a town reborn, Jack pulled Sarah into his arms, not to claim, not to control, but because he finally could. She melted into him, feeling his breath at her ear as he whispered the words that marked the start of everything new. Devil's mine. Not cursed, not owned. But his fight. His fire. His future. And she whispered back, steady and sure, "And I'm yours." Their story had been forged by hardship, saved by courage, and sealed by the kind of love that could only rise from dust and danger. For Dusthaven, a new chapter had begun. For Jack and Sarah, a lifetime.